All right, good morning, everybody. How are you? Good. There was an exploration attempt in 1914 by a guy named Ernest Shackleton, and he was a British guy, and he wanted to cross the Antarctic by foot. And so they set off in August 1914, and so they go down there, but in December of 1914, they get in there into the sea of the Antarctic, and they get stuck. The ice formed around their ship, and they got stuck, and they couldn't get out. And so they tried to dig their way out, break up the ice, but they never were able to. And so finally, in December, they got stuck. They stayed in the ship all the way till October of 1915. And finally, the ice in October started to crush their ship. And so they abandoned ship in 1915 in October, and they escaped with 3 lifeboats and limited supplies. And they worked over the next few months to try to find land. They were trekking over the ice to try to get to the Antarctic. They were still trying to do it, but they never were able to do it. And so finally, they abandoned the mission, and they took those 3 lifeboats, and they set sail. And they were on the water for 5 days, and they made it to an uninhabited island named Elephant Island. They spent 10 days there, and then they realized, well, they can't stay here. So Ernest Shackleton took 5 crew members with him, and they went for help. And they set sail in this little lifeboat on April 9th, 1916. And they set off, but the problem was they endured heavy seas, force 9 winds, and ice buildups on the hull that threatened to capsize their vessel. He said they went through all this over and over. Now, there was a guy named Ranulph Fiennes, hope I said that right, that he wrote a biography of Shackleton in this event, and he said it was the most amazing suffering over a long period. There were constant rebuffs, and to be wet and cold is utterly debilitating. How none of them went completely mad over that period of floating is just incredible, he said. I have never experienced hot or cold suffering that reminded me even a minuscule way of Shackleton's voyage. So they traveled over 800 miles in this little lifeboat to try to find help. And on May the 5th, 1916, he got hit by a tidal wave that he mistook for the sky. He wrote later, he said, I never saw a wave so gigantic, but they survived it. And after 17 days of sea, they landed on the southern coast of South Georgia, but there was no one there. They had to trek 36 hours across the island to get to, and they finally reached the Stromness station on May the 20th. Well, now he knows he's got to go rescue those 22 guys that had been left, and they had stayed back on the Elephant Island and take those 2 remaining boats that they had and overturned them and used those as shelter that whole time, just waiting for help to arrive. So he gets a boat, and he tries, and he fails. He doesn't get to them. And he tries again, and he fails again. Finally, he was able to reach them, and they all survived. On August 30th, 1916, they were all rescued 2 years after they started the journey. Stories of people enduring these kinds of things are inspiring. We love those stories, don't we? But we never want to be the star in that, do we? But the fact is, and we all know this, pain is a part of life, right? And it's part of your life, it's part of my life. And we're going to all have to endure a level of it. And we know that you've either gone through it, you're going through it, or you're about to go through it. That's all of us, every single one of us. And we all want to know, how do you do it well? How can you endure the pain well? If we're all going to go through it, how do we do it well? There was one thing that stood out to me whenever I was reading about this story. This article that I was reading, it said that they had experienced the Endurance sinking and lived on ice floes for months before trying to work out the safest way out. And he said, whatever Shackleton chose, death was the most likely outcome, but he kept cheerful. That's what all the men said about him. He kept cheerful. Now, obviously, a few of us are going to experience challenges like that, but we all want to be able to remain content no matter what the experience is. We would all want that in our lives to be said about us, that no matter what happened, that we would remain content, whatever the circumstance. Paul knew a thing or two about enduring pain. He was literally writing the book of Philippians in chains. All right? He had preached all over the world, and it had been revealed to him early in his ministry that he was going to go to Rome. He just didn't know how he was going to get there. And so he's going around preaching, and then he becomes convinced by the Holy Spirit that he needs to go back to Jerusalem. But to go to Jerusalem means that he's going to risk it. All the people that really, truly hate him are there in Jerusalem. And so he's on his way going, and every time he stops someplace, he's warned. People are warning him, Paul, if you go to Jerusalem, you are going to suffer. And he knows it full well that if he goes, in fact, in Acts chapter 20, verse 20 and 22 and 23, it says, and now compelled by the Spirit, I'm going to Jerusalem, not knowing what's going to happen to me there. I only know that in every city, the Holy Spirit warns me that prison and hardships are facing me. In fact, in the very next chapter, it happens. 21, verse 10 and 11, he says, after we'd been there a number of days, a prophet named Agabus, he came down from Judea. And coming over to us, he took Paul's belt. How awkward is that? If I'm greeting you in front of the church and you just take off my belt. Excuse me? And he took off Paul's belt, and then it says he tied his own hands and his feet with it, and he said, and honestly, that's got to be that takes some time, right? You take off Paul's belt, you don't say what you're doing, all right? You walk out to take off his belt, and then you take the time. Hold on just one second. It's awkward, man. It's super awkward. Agabus must have been some kind of awkward dude, man. But anyway, he says, the Holy Spirit says, in this way, the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem, they're going to bind the owner of this belt and will hand him over to the Gentiles. Paul knew full well what he was getting himself into, but he still goes. He's convinced that the Holy Spirit wants him to go to Jerusalem. So he knows what's going to happen, but he still willingly goes. And he goes to Jerusalem, and that's what happens. He's seized right then and there. They seize him, and then they don't waste time. They're trying to kill him right away. They start beating him, and they try to beat him to death, right? They're trying to punch this guy till he goes night-night. And they nearly do it. And the Roman army comes flying in there and stops the whole situation and saves Paul's life, right? Well, so now he's on trial for crimes against the Jews. And he's standing trial, and he gets to some guys there that's overseeing his trial, and the guys are hearing him out, and Paul appeals his case all the way up to the Supreme Court in their day. He says, I appeal to Caesar, which he had that right because he was a Roman citizen. And the guy listening to his case said, dude, if you hadn't have done that, I'd have set you free. You're innocent here. It's obvious. But I think in that moment, Paul realized, oh, that's how I'm getting to Rome. And that's how I get heard by Caesar. He wants to preach the gospel to Caesar. And so he said, I appeal to Caesar. And so he said, well, you did it now. I was going to let you go. But to Caesar you go. And so now that's where he's at. When he writes the book of Philippians, that's where he's in Rome. He always knew he was going to get there. He just didn't know how. And now he's in Rome awaiting his trial, and he writes this book of Philippians. He writes several books while he's there in house arrest there in Rome. And so there he is. Now, it's interesting that Paul had gone from having a very posh lifestyle before he was a Christian. He had a lot of money. He was well educated. He was highly revered. Okay, he pretty much had it all. And now that he's a Christian, what has he got? He's got a lot of pain and a lot of need. His whole life has changed. And why? Because he chose that. Isn't that interesting? I think it's much easier to start out in need, to not know any different than to go from having a lot to then either giving it up or losing it, right? It reminds me of when I was on the farm in Oklahoma. I drove a tractor called an Allis-Chalmers tractor. Does anybody know what that is? Okay, all right, we got a couple of guys, right? Here's a picture of it. It's a real piece of crud, that thing. It really is. But I didn't know it because it was the only tractor that I ever drove. There was no air conditioning in it, so you had to open up the windows, but you're plowing, and so it's all dusty in there. There was no radio. The seat was bounced hard, and everything, but it was what it was. Well, one day, I was the low man on the totem pole, so I had to drive that, but the top guy, Leonard, he wasn't there one day. I don't remember where he was, but he wasn't there. So his tractor was just sitting there. And he had a nice tractor, a Ford New Holland tractor. Okay? Now look at that. That is a nice tractor. And I thought, well, if Leonard's not here, that one's available. I'm going to drive that. And so I drove it. Biggest mistake ever. That thing was amazing. It had this magical cold air that came out of the vents. Right? You could push a button and music from lands afar would come into your cab there, right? The seat had air cushioned seats in it, Oh man, I loved it. Problem is, Leonard came back the next day and I had to go to that piece of crud the next day and all of a sudden I hated it, right? Well, Paul, he goes from the Ford to the Alice and he's totally okay with it. Totally fine with it. How in the world does a person do that? How can you be content with having nothing, from having everything to go into nothing? Well, he talks about that in Philippians chapter 4. We've been going through Philippians. We're in the last message through the letter. And he talks about this idea of contentment in that chapter. Now, through this series, we named it Firm Foundation, because if you read through Philippians, man, there is some just foundational stuff that he writes about that if we were able to put everything that he writes about in Philippians into our lives as the foundation of our lives, it is not only going to change our lives now, but it's a foundation that we can build on for a long time, for the rest of our lives. Philippians is just one of those books that just hits different. It just reads in a way that changes lives. So what he writes about next is absolutely foundational. And he talks about the ability to endure any kind of situation through a secret called contentment. Look at it. Philippians chapter 4, verse 10 and 11. He said this, I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. In verse 11, it says, I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstance. This church in Philippi had sent Paul a financial gift. They had helped him out. And he was super grateful for it because he didn't have a lot. And he was super grateful for it, but he wanted to teach them a foundational mental shift that honestly would help everybody on the single planet if we were wise enough to live this way. He did not want them to think that he needed the gift. He was grateful for it, and he wanted to show his appreciation. He loved this church, but he wanted to stipulate, he wanted to say, but look, I want you to know, I don't need it. I don't need it. And he's not dismissing the gift, he's teaching him this something. Because for him, his happiness was not connected to his comfort. Those were two separate things for him. He had made the cut. That is not common. It's not common at all. It's very hard to do, but he was able to do it. He was not connecting his happiness. He did not need the gift to be happy. He did not need anything to be happy. His happiness and his comfort were separate, and they were not connected. And so in verse 11, he says this, for I have, what? What does it say? I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstance. Now, he didn't learn this lesson in a day. Nobody starts out being content, do we? You know, what little kid is just content, whatever the circumstance? Ain't none, okay? No kid is that way, and neither were we, all right? We were not born that way. This is something that Paul had to learn, and it's something that we have to learn as well. Now, it reminds me of a story. It reminds me that way back in when I was growing up, I was a little kid, okay? And we're just kind of wired to acquire whenever we're born, aren't we? We want everything, you know? Well, I had two younger sisters, and the older one, her name was Lori. What's the date today? The 5th. My sister Lori had a piggy bank, and I would go in there and I'd steal from her. And I wouldn't steal enough to make it obvious. You know, I'd just steal, a few cents at a time, whatever. But I did it over a period of time. And I would take some money here and there and do just a little bit. And she never knew. I never told her. Never. So she's watching. I never told her. She never knew. Now, I probably stole $5 from her the whole time. Well, I don't like the word steal. You know, I like involuntary loan better. So she gave me a loan that she didn't know about. And that was about 1988. So I did the research. I looked up all the inflations for every year, and $5 from 1988 to today is $12.85. Okay? So I figure I at least owe her $12.85. Well, Zoe, are you in here? Yes. Zoe, come here. Zoe is Lori's daughter. Okay? I've written a check for $12.85. We're going to amortize this loan. There you go. You can give that to your mom, okay? Appreciate it. There we go. And now my conscience is clear, okay? There we go. Yeah. Since 1988 to today. We are wired to acquire, and we always want more, don't we? We always want more. Contentment does not come natural. We have to learn contentment. Now, he expands on this in verse 12. Look at that. He says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. Now, most of us have experienced the realm of knowing what it is to be in need, right? We've all been there. And some of us know what it is to have plenty, right? I graduated college with zero debt. Thank you, Mom and Dad. It wasn't because I worked hard, it was because of them. But my wife, when I started dating her, I found out that she had debt. And she didn't have just a little bit of debt. She had $80,000 of debt. And I thought for a second, yikes. she's pretty and all, but man. Now, most people, you can't put a dollar value on what you're worth. Logan, she knows that she's at least worth $80,000 to me, okay? Now, we got married and we decided we got to pay this off. We got to get rid of it. We cannot go through our marriage with this debt. And so we didn't have anything at the beginning, and we just kept it the same. And we ate beans and rice, okay? We drove junky cars. Every single tax return we got, we didn't go to Costco. Every single dollar went right to that debt service payment, okay? Every extra dollar that we made, we put it on debt. And we paid off that $80,000 in less than 3 years back then. Now, we didn't know what a feat we had accomplished until I was watching about a year later. I was watching the NBC nightly news broadcast, and they ran a story about a couple who had paid off $75,000 in just over 3 years. I told Logan, we did something, because they're running a national news story about something that we did more of in less time, right? Most of us know what it is to be in need. We've all been there, right? Some of us are there now, right? When Paul says that he learned to be content, though, what he's doing for that Philippian church is he's showing them that he is a true friend, that his friendship is not built off of their possessions. He is a pastor to them that is not in it for his self-gain. He says, look, I love the gift. Thank you for it. But don't think that you have to do this. Don't think that I must get this, right? His friendship to that church was true. And he was making that known because he had learned to be content. Now, Paul knew what it was to be in need, but he also knew what it was to have plenty. And Paul had nothing against hard work to achieve financial gain. He just knew that a person's contentment must not be tied to that financial gain. We cannot tie those together. Have lots of money, go for it, great. But do not tie that to your contentment. That's where it all goes. Francis Bacon said, wealth is a good servant, but a very bad mistress. It's a rare thing for someone with lots of money to stop acquiring. To be able to say, I think we have enough. Those words are very rare to somebody who has a lot of money. It's so hard for a rich person to stop. There's always more to buy. There's always a better property, a better car, and another toy. But then he says, I have learned the secret of being content. That word secret is interesting. It's a Greek word, obviously. He wrote it in Greek. And the Greek word there is mysterion, okay? Mysterion. That's where we get our English word mysterious, right? And it wasn't used a lot in the Greek language because it was used of these like mysterious religions in the Greek culture, kind of on the sidelines of their society. There was some of these kind of weird religions, and you could be initiated into the religion by doing some ritualistic ceremonies type stuff. And only the people inside that religion knew about it. And that's the word, the secret, right? Only those people knew about that and that mystery. And Paul takes that word that they used for that and he uses it for what he's saying. I have learned the secret, the mysterion. I've learned that about contentment. But what he's saying is very few people know about this. In fact, he's saying, look, you're on the inside. You have the Spirit of Christ. You can know this. And so what he's doing is he's teaching them this mysterion, this secret of contentment. Now, how to be content, that's the secret, because everybody knows what contentment is, but not everybody knows how to be content. And the next verse, Philippians 4:13, he reveals the secret, right? Look what it says. Philippians 4:13, I can do all this through him who gives me strength. And look what he says. I can do all this through what? What's the secret? The secret is him, right? That's the secret. It's Jesus. Now, we know Philippians 4:13 well. Did you guys know that it's the second most Googled Bible verse in the world, right? The NIV used to read different. Anybody remember that? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's what it used to say. Now they updated it to say, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Well, we put that verse on everything, didn't we? We put it on t-shirts, on mugs, on decorations. Christian athletes used it for their motto, for training, But look, it's obvious that Paul was not saying that you can achieve any of your goals if you just put your mind to it. That's not what he was trying to say. What was he talking about? He was talking about being content. That's what he was talking about. He was not trying to say, I can throw this ball over them mountains, He was not saying I can, achieve 10% growth in my business through him who strengthens me. That's not what he was saying. And it's very obvious about that. And so the NIV did a great job, and they got to the author's meaning, the AIM, the author's intended meaning. And so they changed it to all this. Because Paul was saying he could endure any discomfort, any pain, or any experience. And he is okay. He's okay, and he's fine. But not because they gave him money. He's okay because his contentment comes through Jesus. Possessions come and go, don't they? But Jesus does not. Comfort is fleeting, isn't it? But Jesus is not. Achievements are here today and they're gone tomorrow. But Jesus is not. This verse does not promise that Christians can have the power to do anything. What God promises is to give us the power. Here's the cool thing. He promises to give us the power to endure any circumstance. That's what God promises us. Now that's a promise right there. That we can go through any circumstance and still be content. To go through good times and be content. He's promised that to us. To go through bad times and still be content. See, sometimes we are in need, and that's not always bad. And sometimes we have plenty, and that's not always bad either. Now look, the world by its very nature does not want you to be content. And that's the truth. What would happen if every American became content today? How long would our economy last? It would crumble by Friday. This whole world, it needs you to be discontent for it to function. It is attacking your contentment. Every time you turn on the TV, every time you drive down the road, every time you hear a conversation, every time you look on Instagram and see their vacation, every time, every day, your contentment is being attacked. Every day. It reminds me of a story. I used to live in California, and when I was out there, I would invite college students from Ozark Christian College to come during their spring break every year, and they would come and they would put on a soccer camp for the city there. And I had a good friend of mine that was coming out as one of the college students. His name was Josh Moore. He's a pastor down in Atlanta right now. And he was in my garage, and I had just gotten a new nail gun. we were building these soccer goals in the garage. And I don't know. I saw that nail gun, and I just thought, you know what would be funny? So I turn on the compressor, and Josh, he didn't even ask, And so I got over there, and the compressor, it turned off. It got fully powered up, and I went over there and I hooked in that nail gun to that compressor, and I took duct tape and I taped over the front of it because there's a safety. It won't shoot unless there's pressed against something. So I duct taped the safety down, and I said, "Hey, Josh." And I turned around and I said, "Meet my little friend." I just shot him. And he's like, "Oh my gosh." And that thing, it shot way harder and further than I thought it would. It was hilarious. And I shot him with a nail. And I thought, oh, that's awesome. And I just bam, 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 bam. And I just started shooting this guy. And he was doing this and, trying to do. Well, there's a trash can right there. And he picks up this trash can lid, and he starts using it as a shield, which made it even more hilarious because you could hear those nails, ding, 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 and I was just shooting him as fast as I could go, like as fast as I could pull that trigger, and he was just behind this little shield, just trying to survive. I don't know if he was content that day, but if he wasn't, he needs to learn the secret. Listen, your contentment is under attack. So as we wrap this up, I want to give you three shields that will help us all stay content, all right? The first one is this: be generous. Be generous. When you are generous, it gets you outside of yourself, right? When we are not generous, when we don't give anything to anyone, we make it all about me. And when I make my life all about me, it will not go well. I promise you that. Because the fact is that we can't always be in comfort. We can't always be comfortable, right? We just can't. And the moment that it's all about me and then I'm not comfortable, I have immediately lost my contentment. Am I right? When it's all about me, I can lose that contentment so fast. It's so fickle. But when I'm generous and really looking out to other people and what they need more than myself, then all of a sudden my contentment is not based on my comfort. The second one is this: keep perspective. Don't compare up, right? We always want to compare ourselves up to somebody that has more than us. I would say this: compare down. And the best way to do that, I would say, is go on a missions trip. Please go on a mission trip. Parents, take your kids on a missions trip. Teenagers are wired to have blinders on, and their whole world is about them. Am I right? I'm right. I know. Mission trips just take off the blinders, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, this world's not all about me. Serve at the community Thanksgiving meal. Go do that. Be around people who have needs more than you do. Compare yourself down if you're going to compare yourself. Learn to see other people's needs. And the last one is this: focus on Jesus. At the end of the day, what do we truly, really need? All we really need is Jesus. Amen? All we need is Jesus. Man, we have a lot of wants. We're in the Christmas season now, right? We're all starting to get those lists going, right? Nothing wrong with having wants. But all we need, Paul says, is Jesus. That's all we need. But the world wants to attack that. And they want you to say, no, those wants, they're needs. And they're going to fire those nails at your contentment. And unless our perspective is on Jesus, man, we're going to be succumb to that. And our contentment is going to fail. And we're going to start thinking like the world does. Look, Paul is not asking us to summon the strength to be content on our own. He says that if we have the discipline to remain focused on Jesus, that Jesus will take it from there. Romans tells us how that happens. He says, by the renewing of our minds. He literally changes what's important to us. If we would just spend time with Jesus every day, if we would pray to him and pray about other people's needs, if we would get outside of ourselves and be generous, guys, if we would see other people's need and keep our perspective, we've got a great shot at learning the secret of contentment. And I want to tell you something. If you're content, you've got a great life that no one can take from you, because it's not based on what you have anymore. It's based on who you have and who has you. Listen, can I just be real with us for a second? This world pretends to give you life, but that life is just a shadow of real life. This world begs you to chase what it has to offer. And then you find that pot of gold and you realize that it's empty of the things that really, truly matter. There is no finish line when it comes to chasing after wealth. You will be on that treadmill your whole life. And for many people, they discovered that it was all false way too late for them to have any real purpose in life. What matters in life? What truly matters? Go after that. What if you could live for something so much more fulfilling, so much more important, and more purposeful than getting a boat? I hope you take advantage of what Jesus offers, because he offers true life. Man, if you are someone that needs to accept Christ, it'd be the greatest gift you ever received. I'm going to be right down here for the next two songs. If anybody wants to come down here and just pray with me, maybe you got something going on. Hey, let me pray with you. Maybe you need to make a decision and you want to accept Jesus for the first time in your life. I will definitely do that with you. Guys, if you need to respond, maybe privately at your seat or with me here or with me after service or whatever, do that. Do it. And let me pray.